Hi everyone, I am live. Yves-Olivier, come to me. Nicholas, come to me.
Hi.
Hi, you look pretty.
Well, thanks. How you doing? You look gorgeous.
Thanks. I'm sleepy and so I'm in this like calm serenity state.
Mm, excellent. A perfect place to talk about love, serenity.
Yeah, yeah. Nick Almighty, where you at? How was your day?
It was all right. It was just long Monday. You know how it goes.
You posted something I really liked, and I don't remember what it was anymore. Nick, join. Don't be weird.
I think you have to invite him.
I did.
Oh, yeah. No, I think I posted. It was anti-racist work metaphor, maybe, if that's the thing you're thinking about.
I don't think so.
I don't
It's
know.
something with your friend. You guys were sharing something.
Oh, with Aisha, we were talking about time and the cost of inaction.
That was it.
Yeah,
That was sick.
yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
How's it going, Nick?
Hey babies. Life is good. You know, this IG Live just never likes me. It has not liked me the past few weeks.
It actually called me the other day and told me it didn't like you.
I know. I don't know what it is.
Let's reframe the narrative here.
Self-love.
Self-love, baby.
Everybody say love.
Love.
Love is for the way you look
Uh,
at me.
uh, uh.
I'm excited to be talking about this.
Yay! Thanks for liking my topic. Um, yeah, I'm into like declaring that I'm going to start loving myself.
Talk
I
about
love that for you.
Yeah. Can I jump in? I just like can
Go
I
for
get into meat? Okay.
Right into the deep end.
Yeah, I mean, Yves-Olivier already heard me yesterday go on this spiel, and I'm going to do an abbreviated one, but in all of the like work, emotional, transformational work that I've been doing over, I'll call out the last few years, but honestly, like basically my whole life I've noticed has really been around this idea of like self improvement, which to some degree is like great, right? Like that's a value that I hold is like striving for growth and, being the best person that I can be. And I realize that like this narrative of self development also comes with the context that I'm not good enough, right? Like if I'm improving myself, then where I'm at right now isn't enough.
it.
And um, Alicia James posted the other day, and I'm going to butcher her words, but she posted something like, I'm no longer here to help you essentially. I'm really butchering her words now. I should have looked it up before, but she basically said, I'm no longer here to work with my clients to help them transform. I'm here to work with my clients to transform into like loving themselves. Like that's the fucking work. Like the work is not to change. The work is to accept yourself. And it was just like, I've been coming to this conclusion like slowly over the past few months. But for some reason, when I saw her words, which I'm now butchering, it just like was like that light bulb where I was like, that was it. And it's just like when I think about my own life and like where I'm at and what I'm up to, like that's literally it. And when I think about the work that I want to do with my clients, that's it too. Like, I talk to my clients and like, I mean, no judgment. This is such a human experience, but they are just so fucking hard on themselves. And it's all about like how they should be different or how they're not good enough. And again, like self-development, right? Like we go into problem solving mode and we talk about how they could show up differently. And to some degree, there's some value in that. But also all I want to do is shake them and be like, you are beautiful and amazing. And I just want you to know it. I want you to fire me because you realize that you just are fine where you fucking are. And so that's where I've been at, again, personally and in my business. And that's was the stem. I don't even know if that's self-love, but that's was the stem of me suggesting this theme for today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that's coming up for me is, or the visual, is that, you know, energetically, when we keep trying to grow to reach some kind of milestone, or I'll be happy when or if I will wait, or this goal, income, or this many clients, or this many hours, or I can bench press X amount of weight, or whatever it is. You know, energetically, it's hands are outstretched, right? And we're walking towards these things that we want, but the hand is outstretched. It's kind of like that old school, like the mummy walk.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter how many steps you take, if your arms still are stretched out, you're still reaching, right? The goalposts will forever be changing.
Yeah.
That's like what you're talking about resonates so deeply with me, because I've been doing, you know, as we've done development growth work together, transformational coaching together, this has come up a lot. And at a certain point, it's realizing it's like, well, the way I'm going about it is all wrong, right? My posture is the thing that's dictating that where I am is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, what you're talking about kind of sounds like, okay, what if instead of like reaching out, just give myself.
Oh, look at this! I want to steal this. This is so good. Instead of this, it's this.
Yeah. Be sure to quote me.
I love that. Why is it so damn hard? And maybe I'm just like projecting into the space, but I'm gonna assert that it's a human experience. Why is it so goddamn hard to love yourself and like accept yourself?
I mean, there's so many systems in place geared towards keeping us in the loop of not good enough, you know? We can point to literally anything. Capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism, all of it is rooted in where we are is not good enough. What we have is not good enough. Who I am is not good enough. And then, you know, the finger is pointed elsewhere too, and that's the conversation. And it's so hard. You're so right. You know, I'm with you.
Yeah, I also shared this yesterday that like I was really privileged and blessed that like my parents are the type of parents that wanted to like provide me with a lot of support, right? So like if I, you know, wasn't showing up as, you know, a straight A student in all of my classes, to be clear, I did not have the parents that were like gonna get mad at me and be like, "Why'd you get a B?" But what they would do was like immediately was like, "Let's get her a tutor and let's like put her in special education, even though she's like not a special education student." And like the thing is, their intention was all around like support, and like whether it was around like getting me support with like mental health or even like in my body, like if I was like, oh, like my ear aches, it was like, let's make a doctor's appointment. Like it was coming from such a good place. But this idea where like I constantly got and like needed support kind of reinforced this idea that like it's okay if I get a B in a class, or like I'm gonna be okay. Like I think my like toe that I stubbed will like heal, right? Like it wasn't like I need, like they really reinforced like all the support that they gave me really reinforced that I needed to be different.
Mm.
And I don't blame them. I can't say it enough how privileged I was, and I acknowledge that. And how like lucky I was, and honestly, how I probably benefited from that support. But what it did do on the flip side was reinforce this idea that I needed to develop, that I needed to constantly get better.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably. And I love where you're looking, right? Because a lot of how we relate to ourselves in the world, we learn from our parents. So as you're talking about, like, oh, this habit that I have, like, you recognize the patterns. Like, okay, well, growing up, the people who taught me about the world, who taught me how to live, this was the pattern. And recognizing the pattern is such a huge step in and of itself. Nick, what's coming up for you? Have you looked at self-love? Have you looked at patterns with your parents?
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here, I'm listening and processing because the conversation between you two is just unfolding really beautifully. And I'm trying to reconcile that with my own perspective on self-love, which is not indifferent and it's not in disagreement with what you all are saying. And there's very much a part of me that considers personal development part of my self-love, part of my my toolbox, right? Which is interesting because I try to practice radical acceptance as much as possible, just accepting the fact that I am where I am. And I crave development. I crave knowledge. I crave, that whatever that is, right? Skill development, whatever that is. And it's, for me, it's not so much about not being enough, although I'm sure that is part of it, right? But I genuinely, like, I'm one of those people that loves school. I love to learn. I love a workshop. I love, I love that introspective. I love the getting into my mind and examining it, right? And so as you both are talking about this place of personal development or this thing about personal development and constantly striving for the next because we feel like we're not enough. I totally feel that and hear that. And ultimately, I think what it comes back to for me is that piece around intention, right? Like, what's the intention? What's the motivation? Because it's like anything else. It's not right or wrong. I mean, personal development, if that's how you love yourself, it's not right or wrong, right? It just is. I don't know if I answered the question, Yves-Olivier, but
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. The piece that I would love to respond to is, like, I don't want viewers to conflate that we're talking of that self-love is a departure from growth and like coaching or therapy or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because the way that I see it is, going to therapy is, opening up your brain and taking a look. Going to coaching is like looking in the mirror. And it all depends with the mindset, right? Because if I look in the mirror to be like, hey, am I presentable for the world according to the standards that I set for myself?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have spinach in my teeth? What does my hair look like? What's my skin look like? Versus the intention of obsessing. Like, because of course, with everything, it's in moderation. There's a double-edged sword. And I've been in spaces where like I've overdone the therapy and I've overdone the coaching from a lens and intention of obsession. It's just like staring in the mirror, looking under the hood of the car. I'm like, I hate all of it. Let's change everything. Yeah. So that distinction I wanna make for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, because I think it's sometimes I think it's easy to go to that place. I think it's easy to conflate, and then we get into that right wrong thing, right? Of, oh, is it enough, or is it not enough, or is it whatever it is. I think for me, and I know Gabby and I have talked about this. Sometimes there's almost this addiction to personal growth and development stuff, right? Like I love it, and the other side of the coin is that sometimes I'm addicted to it. I want to do more and more and more. And I think for me, that's when it becomes that, I don't want to say disordered because that's not the right way to look at it, but it's that thing where maybe it's too much, or maybe the intention or the motivation is such that I am trying to fix because I think there's something wrong or broken or whatever.
How do you step outside of the fixing
Yeah.
into self-love?
Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it's about the practice of awareness, right? It's whatever I do to stop and analyze outside of myself. And for some of us, we just do that. Like we naturally will stop and take inventory. For some of us, we're always on autopilot, and it's hard to do that. But the more you do it, the more able you are to step outside of that autopilot and look. But for me, it's about taking inventory and examining exactly what I was talking about. What's the motivation here? Where is this coming from? What is my desire? What is my need? Um, yeah.
Hmm.
I'm just really present to like how powerful like intention is. And I want to be clear before I say what I'm gonna say, which like I still don't hold it that there are certain intentions that are right or wrong. It's just the whole
Mm-hmm.
point is being clear on intention. Like I think so much of the work I feel I do as a coach is that like looking at in action in scenario one and scenario two could be exactly the same. You could be doing the exact same thing, but where is it coming from? Right? Is it coming? You can make a decision from fear, and you can likely make the exact same decision from power. But what's behind it? And that's what I'm hearing we talk about now, you know, because we definitely are playing in this like right, wrong, should we develop, should we not, whatever. And I think what it comes down to is intention, right? You talk about the support that I'm talking about with my parents and how like it really reinforced for me that I constantly need to develop. Their intention was really fucking great. It was like I'm lucky. It was to give me all the tools that they could. Um, and so their intention was in one place, and where I have since translated it was into a story that wherever I'm at, I need to be somewhere else, right? So I just think like I know I'm talking a little bit like pie in the sky, but like everything that we talk about, it's not about right or wrong, and it's not even about the action or the thing itself needs to change or even could change. It's just really taking a step back and like what's the intention behind it.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks so much for distinguishing that. And it feels to me kind of the distinction between intention and impact, right?
Mm.
Because you're recognizing that your parents loved you and you were privileged. And when you got a B, right, the lesson wasn't, oh, love yourself. The lesson was like, oh, go to tutoring, which I assert was a form of them loving you.
100%.
Yeah.
But that's the intention, right? But the impact then where you are is, oh, I have to go change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a powerful distinction to make. And, you know, as we're talking about self-love and talking about like what we learn from our parents, I honestly only know a handful of people who have learned like honest, authentic, healthy forms of self-love from their parents, right?
Mm.
Because we've all inherited a lot. We're unlearning 10,000 years of bad behavior. So I love that you're bringing this here because it's not necessarily out of an absence of love, because the
Mm.
love was there.
Mm-hmm.
but just the message that you received was not
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, I love myself through this.
Yeah.
I also have been thinking about the lessons that I've learned about self-love and criticism and growth and all of this stuff. And while I've had similar moments where I'm looking at, okay, well, when this happened, my parents did this. When this happened, my mom did this. When this happened, my dad did this. Whatever it is, what I'm noticing outside of like realizing the patterns, labeling them, etc., my easiest, greatest access point to self-love is as I'm ruminating on that, I take a step back and I think, okay, who was that child? My inner child.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, what if I just treated myself now the way that I imagine I would have liked to have been treated then? And it simplifies everything so much for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I think childlike, and I'm like, you know what? Let's make it simple. Let's make it easy. Let's make it calm.
Yeah, I feel like this like idea that I always had as a child of like adults, like once you're an adult, like you're mature and like you're healed and like all this stuff. It's so funny to like be an adult now. Not that I really identify with that, even though I'm 32. But like this idea of like being an adult is like, oh, like I'm just still that like kid that is still confused and still figuring out the world and still figuring out how to love herself. Um, but all this to say is like, I feel like, you know, if you're anything like me, there's this idea that we complicate things once we enter adulthood, right? We're supposed to be a certain way or whatever. And I think I'm really into this idea that you're posing of like connecting into that inner child and like, how does the inner child want to be treated? How does the inner child want to be spoken to? What does the inner child want to do? Right? It strips away all the like stupid complexities that we add onto adulthood. Um, and it also can be a really healing experience, right? Like you can heal your 6 year old self in you by speaking to your 6 year old self now.
I think that's so important. And in fact, that's one of the awareness practices or the inventories that I do with myself sometimes, especially when I'm having an intense emotional reaction or response to something, or something has hijacked my body, right? Somatically and energetically. And I'll stop and I'll ask myself, how old do I feel right now in this moment?
Oh, I love that.
And it's surprising because sometimes the answer is 5 or 6, sometimes the answer is 13. You know, it's like, how old do I feel right now? And I approach my reaction, my response, my being from that place, and it's so powerful. The trick, or maybe not the trick, is having that awareness to stop and ask yourself that when you are being hijacked. But sometimes even if you can't catch it in the moment, right? Even if you are 10 minutes, 15 minutes after the incident or whatever it is that's happening, you're like, oh, let me ask myself, how old did I feel in that moment? Or how old, or maybe you catch it 24 hours later. Oh, you know what? That was a really shitty moment. How old did I feel then? Like, even just that work, getting back into it, I think it's so powerful. And for me, it's just one of those tools that really allows me to access that part of me that needs to be nurtured, that part of me that wants to be nurtured and loved, and allows me to do that for myself. It's that self-soothing. Yeah. I'm really interested, as we talk about self-love, it's hard for me sometimes to distinguish self-love from self-care. And I'm really curious to hear both of you, like, if you distinguish it, how you distinguish it. I'm just really curious, because for me, it's really hard to distinguish them.
Well, before I respond, I would actually be curious what the distinction would give you.
Well, I've been thinking about this really today as preparing for this conversation, because so much of what I consider to be or the way that I would access self-love, right, are also self-care practices. So it's the being and doing and all of that we're always talking about, right? And I think self-care may be the tools or the actions to access self-love, or to not even access self-love, but to, yeah, maybe that's the, I think, the best word here. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, because you're both so brilliant and I love bouncing things off of you. Did that answer your question, or are you saying that's bullshit because I know you so well? And
No,
okay.
that answered. Just a nice little coaching question for you.
Wink, wink.
Yves-Olivier, do you have a response? Or
Yeah. The thing that comes up for me is, I know we've been talking about intention a lot already, but intention is the big thing that lands. Because I think that, initially it was like, oh yeah, well, self-care is the doing of like bathing and feeding and clothing and taking care of our bodies and our minds and our spirits and sleeping well, etc. But self-love takes consistent intentional doing also, but just in a different way. I think the energetic investment has to be the same. And I think that there's definitely overlap. I think self-care can even be viewed as a form of self-love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's like lots of self-care routines and things that if we're not mindful or intentional about it, will be the farthest thing from self-love. I remember a point in my life when I would bathe myself, the negative self-talk was rampant and out of control. So in that moment, I was taking care of myself, like I was taking self-care body-wise, but it was so hateful that it was totally not self-love at all, right?
it was
So
the
that's,
intent. What's the intention? What's the thoughts behind it? Yeah.
yeah, that's where I'm at. That's what I got.
You just like, I don't know if this is a random thought, but it was the only thought that came to mind so far. But you just reminded me of a few months ago, I was really generating a breakthrough in pleasure. And I kept thinking, like, well, I was holding on to a story of, like, I don't know how to do pleasure, which is like a story. And I was invited by my coach to think about, like, okay, well, what are everyday activities that you already do where you can just bring in pleasure? Like, you can just be pleasure. And I was reminded, actually, specifically because you said the bathing, because she was like, what if instead of just like stepping in the shower and like washing your hair, like you actually did it from like pleasure? It shouldn't even mean sexual pleasure. Just like, what if it was like connecting in with your body, or like having fun, or, you know, having a dance party, or like whatever it is. Like, what if she said, use your shower time for pleasure and see how your experience is different? And it totally fucking worked. And I just think, like, you know, again, I know I'm on a little bit of a tangent, but this idea of intention where like the action can be the same. It's what's the belief, what's the intention, what's the being, what's the declaration behind the action, and to connect it back to self-love, you know, am I being self-love in this action? Am I caring for myself in this action? You know?
Yeah. And I love the distinction that all roots back to thoughts, right? Because if we think about the Brooke Castillo coaching school models, the CT-FAR, the context, thoughts, feelings, actions, results, you know, changing the thoughts, you know, that's where it branches out. And if the thought is, I love this thing, you know, it's like, okay, what if every time I drink a sip of water is an act of self-love?
Mm-hmm.
I do this because I love you. I do this because
Mm-hmm.
I love myself.
Mm-hmm.
What's the shift there? You know, and another thing that Brooke Castillo talks about, you know, when she talks about desire, it's the same exact thing. It's like, why don't you just practice wanting what you have?
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with, you know, what I'm imagining Tyler told you about pleasure. It's like, what if you just took pleasure in what you're already doing? Because it's the thought that then changes the experience about it. And I love this because then if we're going to take this further, then that engenders that anything we do can be self-love if we have the thought that it is out of love of self.
Wow.
Cool, cool, cool.
Yeah, and like similarly, and to kind of connect back to what you were saying, Nick, around like the idea of self-care, right? Like when I think about like the actions that I do for well-being, right? When I first, you know, introduced this idea of well-being and self-care, I was like, oh, well, it's drinking water and exercising and getting good sleep. And actually, if you think about like your whole person self, like self-care, it's actually also things around spirituality and social and mental and emotional. And so like, you know, if I have a practice that I think both of you also do, but around like I literally have a well-being tracker and I track the activities that I do towards my well-being. And all the things on there are random as fuck, right? Like, or might seem disjointed. Like I have things like meditation, but I also have things like go through my business expenses, right? Because they're all tied to the like overall like well-being of me. And so I'm just seeing now like I think I've taken that leap for granted of just like accepting that like all of these actions are well-being. But if I actually broke it down, what's happening is I'm declaring the intention of these actions being towards my well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing this. And as with everything, right, everything in moderation, I'm wondering if we can kind of feel out the field of this. Because I know for me, I've had instances where I don't know, I roll myself a joint and I just like crash for a night. And just like, okay, it's 6 p.m., turn off my phone, chill. And I tell myself, okay, this is out of self-care, this is out of self-love. But if I were to do that, right, 365 days in a row, that's not self-care. And that's not self-sabotage.
Well, it's probably also like the intention and what's behind it has shifted.
Exactly. Yeah. So as we're talking about self-care and self-love, I think, you know, yes, the intention has to be there, but there also, what's the thing that I'm craving in this conversation, I guess, in this hypothetical? What I'm craving is like a realistic sense of impact. Because it would be so easy to just buy like a Costco cheesecake and say self-care, right? And if
it would be so easy.
If I could convince myself that the thought is that I do this because I love myself, right? Where is that going to fall?
And by the way, that could be self-care, to your point.
Absolutely, right? And
Yeah.
where is the line?
Yeah.
Well, I think the line is there's a difference between what you're telling yourself and what you're actually believing underneath. Because if you're buying entire cheesecake from fear, sadness, avoidance, you know, other things that are not coming to mind, but you're logically telling yourself the story that it's self-care, it's still not self-care. It's just like what the story on top. So I think
Yeah,
the
what's the
way
story?
that you manage the moderation is like connecting into like the deepest, truest story, like telling what's actually real. And like you want to talk about, like you mentioned this earlier, Yves-Olivier, like there is a place for therapy and coaching and other support modalities in this idea of self-love. And I think that's it. Like that's like one of the many ways is like having a coach to support you in connecting into like what's the actual story of what's going on.
Yeah. And I love that. And I like to think about like the tripod for us humans here on earth for this is, mind, body, spirit. And if we go to a therapist for our mind and we go to a coach for spirit, right? And we take care of our bodies, then we'll have like a good, rigid sense of self.
Mm.
But, it takes all the work in combination.
Mm.
Mm.
And it's so funny, like I'm just like bringing it all full circle, but like you said, it takes all the work, right? But it's not, it's like the work in caring for yourself and falling in love with yourself. It's not the work in, I need to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a quote running in my mind that, self-discipline is self-love. Because there's another thread that says, okay, well, self-love is just living on the beach forever and ever, right? Eat some coconuts, have some mojitos, cool.
And that may be true for some people.
And that may be true for some people, for sure. Yeah. But in my experience, that wouldn't be like a full expression of self-love.
Oh.
Hi.
I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. I'll be right there. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine.
What?
I'm gonna hold on. It's okay.
For the first time that I am accepted, I am not ready to be there. And forgive me. I'm so sorry. No, I just want to listen. I thought I would listen.
No, you're totally fine. I'm just figuring out how to remove.
That's okay. I can do.
Okay.
All right.
Anyhow.
I was a little confused. Yeah, but anyway, self-love.
You were saying at the very end. What were you saying? I got distracted. You were saying around
self-discipline is self-love.
Discipline. Okay. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, well, I just want to be mindful of making these distinctions and setting the boundary of like what is self-love and everything in moderation, right? And what is the balance of it? Because I think that it's so easy to convince ourselves that our self-care habits can encompass a lot more than really what we want to. And you identified with like working with a coach, working with a therapy, identifying what's the lowest, truest truth. And processing from there. And part of the balance of like indulgence has to be tempered with discipline, at least in my experience.
Can we talk about discipline on our next call?
That'd be great.
Because I think you don't have thoughts formed yet, but I know I'm having some reaction in my body to that word.
Yves-Olivier, can you repeat what you just said about?
Let's move on.
No!
Let's move on. I'm actually complete on that. I just, what's the thing that you would like me to repeat? Self-love is self-discipline.
Yes, but I lost it. You said something about indulgence, and my mind went somewhere else, and I wasn't here with you.
Balancing indulgence with discipline, and then not on the discipline track.
Yes, yeah, and but what I wanted to say about that is it's like anything else, right? It's that thing you were talking about moderation. It's about balance. It's about the integration work that we do, right? And I've been thinking about how that relates to self-love, right? Loving, not just loving the part of me that I think is right or good or whatever, but also loving the parts, accepting the parts of me that are not always my best and highest self, right? Like that is also self-love, the integrating
100%.
all the parts of me that make me who I am, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
The parts that people love and the parts that piss people off.
Because you're fucking human.
Because I'm a human.
Right? Like, all of these things that, like, okay, I'll speak to myself, but I'm asserting other people have similar experiences, is like these things that, like, I quote unquote don't like about myself, or I quote unquote which wish, that was a hard word to say, wish were different. The majority of those things were developed at some point in my life to protect myself. Like,
Absolutely.
certain habits, like, right, like, I have a habit of pushing people away like no one's business. Like, when I feel like it's getting too intimate, or even if I get the tiniest inkling that, like, you might want to push me away, I'm going to push you away first. I'm going to convince myself that I don't like you, that you're not a good friend for me. I'm going to push you away. Well, I'll be honest, I don't like that that's my pattern. It's not what I'm committed to. It's not fun. It's not how I want to be in a relationship. But I also get to love that I have created that pattern to protect myself from the massive amount of abandonment that I experienced as a child.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing that. And as we talked about when we discussed integration, right, it's in recognizing it, it's in shining the light on it, it's in loving it that we get to transform it, or we get to be aware of it so that we can not have the pattern influence us.
Yeah.
That is a form of self-love, absolutely. I love that we brought this in.
And you didn't want to talk about discipline and indulgence.
I love when we call each other out.
Well, it wasn't really a call out, but
A call in, we'll call it.
ooh, okay.
That's
How are we feeling,
over.
team? How are we feeling about self-love?
I feel like I love you too.
Yeah. I love myself, and I love y'all, and I appreciate where we've landed in the conversation.
Yeah, this is sick. This is like one of my favorite combos we've had.
Yeah, I think, and that's for me, I think where I want to leave it is that self-love is so important for I feel very strongly that it is hard for me to love other people without loving myself, which is cliche, right? Because I feel like people say that, but I also think there's so much truth to that. It is so hard. It would be so difficult for me to love both of you without loving myself. And
Yes.
I think that's where I want to leave the conversation, is that it's not about being right or wrong, right? It's just the isness of it. It's I cannot take care of others. I cannot love others without doing that for myself.
Yeah. Thanks so
My
much.
heart is like really activated in like a positive way.
Yeah.
Like I'm speaking to the concept of love, and I'm really having like a physical body experience of it. Like that chakra is like flowing right now.
Yeah. No, my soma's kind of buzzing right now. I feel kind of high, which is nice.
Yeah. Thanks y'all so much.
Thank you. I will talk
Love
to you next week.
you. Bye.
Bye.